Baroness Cox.
My Lord, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, further work on the issues raised began in the spring as announced in the Integrated Communities Action Plan. This work will explore reform possibilities in relation to the issue that some people may marry in a way that does not create a legally recognised marriage. This exploration will be conducted independently of the wider Law Commission review of the law on marriage ceremonies.
My Lord, in thanking the Noble Lord the Minister for his reply, may I ask if he's aware that my question is almost identical to the question I asked on 28th of February, because I have had no response or seen any evidence of progress on this crucial issue causing such suffering to Muslim women through the application of sharia law. Whereas many of them come to me desperate, destitute, even suicidal, with no rights following asymmetrical divorce inflicted by their husbands or trapped in unhappy polygamous marriages. And the recommendations of the Sharia Law Review and the message from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe are totally consistent with the objectives of my private member's bill requiring all religious marriages to be registered, thereby giving women the rights they so urgently need. Therefore, may I ask the Minister for an assurance that the legislation will be introduced as a matter of great urgency, as so many women are suffering in ways which will make the suffragettes turn in their graves.
My Lords, we understand and recognise that there is a very real issue here, but it is more of a social issue than a legal issue. I cannot accept that the proposed way forward set out by the noble lady in her private member's bill is appropriate. Her proposals would effectively deregulate marriage ceremony law and undermine the safeguards in it, including in relation to sham and forced marriages.
My Lords, can I disagree with my noble friend? It's not a social issue. It is a legal issue. So therefore we do need, and I entirely agree with Baroness Cox, that it is a matter that does need to be looked at urgently. We can have a register which allows imams to register nikahs very easily, and we do need to do this as quickly as we possibly can.
My noble friend is, of course, perfectly entitled to disagree with me, and I, in turn, disagree with her. So let us be clear as to what the position is, because some of this proceeds upon a misapprehension. It is perfectly possible to perform a lawful marriage in England and Wales under Sharia law, provided that the relevant mosque has been identified and registered by the registrar as a place for the performance of that ceremony, and that a person has been identified by the registrar as a suitable person to be present for that ceremony. And the law of England and Wales has then to be adhered to. Sharia law is not the law of England and Wales. It has no standing. Our national law prevails in these matters. Our national marriage law prevails in these matters. But again, I reiterate, we understand and appreciate that there is a social issue here because many are not aware of the true position with regard to our law in respect of marriage, and many, indeed, are not prepared to adhere to that in circumstances where one or other party may be ignorant of their true position and its consequences.
My Lords, the Council of Europe, referred to in the question by the noble lady Baroness Cox, are very clear. Where human rights are concerned, there is no room for cultural exceptions. The independent review, which is commissioned by the government in 2016, is also clear on its main recommendations that Muslim women undergoing Islamic marriage must be protected by British civil law. Too many vulnerable women are suffering and will suffer until the government pulls its finger out and implements this recommendation, my Lord.
My Lords, with great respect, some of what has been said by the Council of Europe in its Resolution 2253 does not reflect the true position of marriage law in England and Wales. And in particular, the reference to civilly registering a marriage is inept. It does not reflect the true position of our law in England and Wales. Civil registration per se is not a route to a lawful marriage.
My Lord, my Lord, my Lord, in the present circumstances, what is the position of triple talaq? Is it still possible for a Muslim man to divorce his wife just by saying talaq, talaq, talaq? Is the Minister aware that in India there is a bill before two houses of Parliament to reform the Triple Talaq Bill? Will Her Majesty's government follow that example?
My Lords, divorce in England and Wales is determined by the national law. It is not determined by religious observance or religious laws, and therefore it would be necessary a party seeking a divorce from a lawful marriage made in England and Wales to proceed under our national law. We appreciate that there are social difficulties with regard to some religious groups in circumstances where a person may believe that they have been divorced under religious provisions, whether of the type that the Noble Lord has just referred to, or indeed under sharia law, or indeed sometimes with regard to the gut in the context of the Jewish religion as well.
Would the Noble Lord the Minister, Minister consider...
Noble Lord the Minister agree that culture should never trump human rights, and that all citizens of this country should enjoy equal protection under the law.
It is, of course, essential that all citizens should have equal protection under the law. It is also important that they should be treated equally under the law.
Does my noble friend... The United Kingdom was a founder member of the Council of Europe. Since the United Kingdom was a founder member of the Council of Europe...
Order.
Does my noble friend agree that it is perhaps a little misleading to refer to Sharia rules as law? All religions, of course, have a perfect right to set out the regulations of their faith. But is it not wrong to refer to those regulations as law? With the exception of the Church of England's ecclesiastical and religious regulations, all the others are subject to UK law. Consequently, does my noble friend agree that if sheer regulations, for example on treatment of women, conflict with UK law, then UK law, being sovereign, overrides these regulations?
My noble friend is absolutely right that clearly national law is what must be adhered to. I don't take exception to the reference to religious law or Sharia law. In a social context, there are parties who wish to adhere to that because of their religious beliefs, but they have to understand that that is subject to the law of the land, and Sharia law is not the law of the land and has no standing as such.
Lord Campbell-Savours.
My Lord, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order page.
My Lords, as sponsors to the inquiry, Home Office officials have a responsibility to protect the inquiry's independence and ensure it has the resources it needs to deliver its terms of reference, as set out in the ICSA management statement. Regular discussions have taken place in the last month regarding such sponsorship issues.
My Lords, is it not ironic that whilst so-called complainants with substantial criminal records are accorded anonymity as witnesses before ICSA, those who stand accused, such as Harvey Proctor, Jana and others, still have no anonymity, still no right to cross-examine witnesses, still no right of defence, and can still be freely attacked even when they're dead? ICSA isn't listening to Parliament. Is this not precisely what Sir Cliff Richard was referring to when yesterday launching the FAIR Fair campaign pre-charge anonymity petition, now being supported by thousands every day? My Lords, the law is an ass and should be reformed. And can I ask colleagues in this House to listen to the excellent episode of Moral Maze last night on Radio 4, where these matters were dealt with beautifully?
Well, my Lords, on the first point, the hearings are inquisitorial and it enables the inquiry to test witnesses and their evidence. All core participants are provided with the evidence and their legal teams are permitted both to propose questions to be put to the witnesses and to apply to the Chair for permission to put questions to a witness. And in terms of the point that he also made yesterday, clearly I can't comment on the handling of specific investigations, but current police guidance, as I said yesterday, is very clear, and it adopts a very similar approach to that advanced by the petition to which the noble lord refers, i.e. that suspects' identities should not be released before charge, save in exceptional circumstances and with proper oversight. And I'm not aware of evidence to suggest that the police are not following the guidance.
My Lords, for too many years, victims of child sexual abuse have been ignored, and it is now their time to be heard. But what consideration has the government given to special provisions where serious allegations of child sexual abuse are made against those who have died or who otherwise are unable to defend themselves?
Well, I have to say that I wholeheartedly agree with the first part of the noble lord's statement, which is that for too long those victims have been ignored. In terms of the anonymity to which he refers, and we talked yesterday about his bill, I think I've just explained in my answer to noble Lord Campbell-Savours about the presumption of anonymity save in exceptional circumstances.
My Lord, my noble friend, accept that there is within your Lordship's house a seething discontent about the way in which Sir Edward Heath's reputation has been trashed, Leon Britton's reputation was trashed, Greville Janner's reputation was trashed. Can my noble friend not see that what this House would like is something like a royal commission set up on this very issue, appointed by the government and given 6 months or 9 months to report?
Well, I, of all people, am very aware of the anger within your Lordship's house, but I'm also aware, and let's get to the heart of what ICSA is about, that there are historic issues that need to be tested and explored through the inquiry for all those people for whom some of the historic events have not been yet addressed.
As the noble lady the Minister has said, the College of Policing guidelines advise officers not to name those arrested or suspected of any crime, quote, save in exceptional circumstances where there is a legitimate policing purpose to do so, close quote. Two noble lords yesterday, in the debate on the noble Lord Lexton's question, referred to the desirability for a judge or a court to have to approve the release by the police of the name of an individual arrested or suspected of a crime but not charged, as opposed to that approval being able to be given as now by a chief officer following consultation with the Crown Prosecution Service. I wasn't quite sure of the government's position on this point. Does the government believe that the present College of Policing guidelines satisfactorily address the issue of anonymity until charged of those arrested or suspected of any offence, or is the government now seriously considering whether a decision to name an individual not yet charged should be a judicial one rather than a police decision?
Well, perhaps it'd be helpful if I went over what I said yesterday, which is that the College of Police's authorised professional practice guidance on relationships with the media makes it clear that suspects' names should only be released to the media prior to charge in exceptional circumstances if there is a legitimate policing purpose for doing so. For example, where there's a threat to the public or for the prevention and detection of crime. The approach recognises that there is a risk of unfair damage to the reputations of those who are arrested, particularly if they are never charged. And in terms of do we support this approach? Yes. And as I said to the noble Lord Campbell-Savours, we have every evidence that the police are sticking to that guidance.
Does the new guidance mean that never again will a police officer pronounce, having talked to a complainant, that his evidence was credible and true?
Well, I think what the issue of Operation Conifer did do is actually allow the police to look at their guidance and make sure that it was as clear as it could be. And as I said, there isn't any evidence that the police are flouting that guidance. So I do hope that this situation will continue.
Use is endemic in many institutions and has been historically. Can she say what's being done to ensure that people who are now older, who suffered so terribly by different institutions, are still being encouraged to come forward and give evidence and seek justice? We know that many have already committed suicide or have died, but it's very important we don't forget that those children, those young people, need protecting.
Well, the noble lady is absolutely right, and many of those children are now well into adulthood, and it is very important that people feel that they can come forward and actually give their testimony to the inquiry. And over 320 individual victims and survivors are participants in the inquiry, as well as a number of other survivor groups and institutions. And the inquiry to date has received almost 2 million pages of evidence, and over 300 witnesses have given evidence.
Lord Berkeley.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask a question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the periodic review process that will determine the new track access charges for HS1 from April 2020 is ongoing and is the responsibility of the independent rail regulator, the Office of Rail and Road. In line with the published draft franchise agreement, the operator of the new South Eastern franchise will be held harmless to any charges in regulated track access charges proposed by HS1 and agreed by the ORR following regulatory scrutiny.
Well, I'm grateful to the Noble Minister for that answer, but she will be aware that the HS1 has applied for increases in the track access charges for domestic trains at South Eastern of 25%, Eurostar for 40%, and the freight that has to use that line by 75%. Will the Minister remind the ORR of its duties under the 1993 Railways Act and subsequent legislation, and I will quote, to promote the use of the railway network for the carriage of passengers and freight and to protect the interests of users? Could I suggest to her that allowing for the regulator to allow such increases will harm dramatically passengers on the South East by increasing fares? And isn't it better that the passengers are protected rather than lining the pockets of the pension funds, including the Korean pension fund, which now owns that piece of track?
I thank the Noble Lord for his observations. As he will well know, this process is ongoing, and so any increases are as yet not confirmed. But my department expects the independent regulator, the Office of Rail and Road, to provide a very robust and a rigorous challenge to HS1's proposals as part of this review process. And I am aware that this process has been going on for 18 months and it is continuing.
My Lords, Eurostar operates in a multimodal travel market, which includes airlines, and HS1 is already the most expensive in Europe by a big margin. If the government is serious about reaching zero carbon by 2050, this is just the kind of cost that needs to be kept firmly under control, and it is not acceptable for the government to hide behind the regulator. Can the Minister give me an assurance that the government will be making it clear to the regulator that costs like this must be well controlled?
I can assure the Noble Lady that the government is making it very clear to the regulator that we expect a robust and a very rigorous challenge. They are, of course, independent, but we do recognise the importance of Eurostar, both from environmental reasons, but also just by providing extra capacity on a different mode of transport, and so we support high-speed passenger services to Europe.
My Lords, is it not of great concern that cross-channel operators, whether of freight or passengers, should be severely affected by the proposals as they currently stand? And isn't it just a bit bizarre that the long-awaited new trains for the Anglia region, which will make a once only in their lifetime journey to the Anglian region, will have to be carted on freight trains, as they're not allowed to go under their own steam, incurring extra cost? So aren't these reasons why my noble friend should keep a particularly close eye on the current discussions to ensure a fair solution is found?
And I would like to reassure my noble friend that we are keeping a very close eye. I mean, obviously, on the subject of the new trains, they are freight like everything else when they are being transported. But we are concerned by the proposed significant increases. And as I have said, we will be looking to the ORR to provide that robust challenge.
Would the Minister agree that it was perhaps an unfortunate piece of business for the coalition government, which, as I recollect, included the Liberal Party, to vote to sell Britain's first high-speed line to a foreign-based consortium? And would she agree with my noble friend that such consortia would be more concerned about their return to Canadian teachers as well as South Korean pensioners than the plight of passengers travelling between St Pancras International and Ashford? And whether she agrees or not, what's she going to do about it?
I'd like to thank the noble lord for that comment. I do not agree, surprisingly enough, that the sale of this asset to investors, foreign or otherwise, was a bad idea. It is the case that long-term infrastructure investors can provide a very useful source of capital to assets precisely like this. But this is why we have the ORR involved in this process, because they will determine if the concession agreement is being met. They will determine the outputs that HS1 must deliver in the next control period. They will look at the asset management plan, the regulatory framework, the structure of the charges, and indeed the charges themselves.
Doesn't this press reports have appeared today about franchising, indicating that the government may give to the state-owned LNER a 5-year extension of its franchise?
I'm afraid the noble lord has me stumped on that one, because I have not seen those press reports this morning, but I will certainly write to him if I can find out any more information.
My lord, doesn't this debate reveal that there's still a contradiction in the government's own transport policy so far as the benefits of freight traffic being on rail? This extraordinary increase of charges on HS1 should be investigated, and the government has not answered the question by the noble lady on the Liberal Democrat benches as to whether it's compatible with the government's transport policy.
The government absolutely supports the movement of freight on rail, and indeed we were very interested to read the report by the National Infrastructure Commission on freight. It's a very good study, and we will be taking forward further work in this area. But I would like to remind the noble lord that we have invested £500 million through the Strategic Freight Network Fund, a very important investment at some of our ports and elsewhere, and also we provide rail freight subsidy through the Mode Shift revenue support grants for National Rail Track of £15.6 million, which takes 800,000 lorries off the road.
Lord Kennedy of Southwark.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name in the order paper and draw the attention to my relevant interest as a Vice President of the Local Government Association.
My Lords, the Government recognises the vital work councils do to support their communities. That's why the 2019-20 settlement confirmed councils' core spending power will increase by 2.8% in cash terms, including an additional £650 million for social care. This is a real terms increase in resources to support critical services. The Department is preparing actively for the spending review, which is the right place to take long-term funding decisions.
My Lords, the Conservative-led Local Government Association just published research which I referred to, which shows that one-third of local authorities fear they're going to run out of funds by 2022-23, and that rises to two-thirds of councils by 24-25. In the light of this disturbing and sombre news, has the Honourable got any more further words of encouragement, hope, something for hard-pressed local councils to and their civic leaderships as they end their conference today in Bournemouth?
Well, can I say that I think that local councillors and local government officials have done remarkably well to maintain and in some cases improve the quality of the services they provide, despite, since 2010, a reduction in grant until recently, which was necessary in order to provide balance to the national accounts. And they've done that without excessive rate increases, and I recognise that. Looking forward, I've seen the report to which the noble lord refers, I welcome the Local Government Association's attempt to quantify the pressure on their resources. That information will be used by ministers to feed into the spending review to make the case for a proper settlement for local government.
My Lords, I'd like to remind the House of my Vice Presidency also of the Local Government Association, and I think local government will be pleased that the Minister thinks that the sector is doing remarkably well. Indeed it is. But could I ask the Minister whether he would accept that local government is facing ever-rising costs in service provision at the same time as there is increasing pressure on income, not least business rates in the retail sector? And does the government accept that this situation is turning into a crisis and would benefit from urgent cross-party discussions across national and local government, looking forward to the spending review, but also examining fair funding, assumptions about council tax levels and the future of business rates?
Can I say to the Noble Lord, I was a Vice President of the Local Government Association until I was expelled for introducing rate capping in the 1980s. On the serious issue the Noble Lord raises, extra funding announced in last year's budget means the government will have given councils access to £10 billion of dedicated funding that can be used for adult social care, which is the real pressure point, in the 3-year period to 2019-20. And that's a combination of the adult social care precept and the Better Care Fund. So far as his invitation to cross-party discussions, always welcome. I think it's always helpful to have a consensus on how local government is funded. On the issue of fair funding and the business rates retention scheme, announcements on that will be made alongside the decisions on the spending review.
Could I ask my noble friend what can be done to ensure adequate funding for trading standards officers who do such an important job on product safety, fake airbags, dangerous tumble dryers and so on? This disturbing list could, I think, get longer unless priority is given to this work in the spending review. And it doesn't require huge sums of money, but it does require better resourcing.
Well, I pay tribute to the work done by trading standards officers, whose case is championed by my noble friend. As she will know, local government doesn't like funding that is ring-fenced, so the resources for trading standards are included in the block grant. As I said a few moments ago, there has been a real increase in the funding for this year's settlement. I hope when we get next year's settlement there will also be a useful increase. It is then up to local government to give priority to the services that my noble friend has referred to.
My Lords, given the government's advocacy...
Children's Commissioner for England, an in-depth study of spending by local authorities on children's services. In that report, she highlights that 2.32 million children in this country are suffering from significant risk factors, and that by 2025 we'll be needing to spend £10 billion a year to meet these children's needs. Does he agree that we need to fund local authorities better so they can provide the essential early support to families so that children at risk don't be needed to be taken into care, into foster care and residential care?
The noble Lord makes a powerful point, and in the budget last year, an additional £410 million was added to the social care support grant for adults and children. And the case that he has just made, reinforced by the report he refers to this morning, will reinforce the case to be made by ministers at MHCLG in their discussions with the Treasury about future funding.
My Lords, given the government's advocacy and indeed imposition in many parts of the country of directly elected mayoral systems, and given the pressure, enormous pressure on local government finance at the moment, can you tell us whether these new systems represent good value for money in comparison with more traditional methods of local government administration? And if he doesn't have precise figures to hand on this issue, isn't it worth at least having an examination of the comparative costs of the two systems of local government?
The government has not imposed mayors on parts of the country. They have elected to have mayors. There has been no imposition All the cases of combined authorities, local mayors, have been when local government has come to the government and asked for these powers to be given to them. I think the noble lord will find that he's misinformed, that we have imposed this structure on local government.
My lords, has my noble friend had an opportunity to read the report today on social care from the Economic Affairs Committee? And would he note that social care and the local authorities have seen a real terms cut in resources, that there are 1.4 million elderly people who are not receiving the care they need? Does he not recognise that by shifting the burden onto local government and relying on rates, this results in, on business rates, this results in postcode inequality, as different local authorities have different demands and different abilities to raise resources? Shouldn't this be funded centrally and done so urgently?
I say to my noble friend, I took the precaution of getting a copy of his report, which was published this morning. For the last 30 or 40 years, government has been trying to bring together health and social care. And if you're an elderly person in need, you're not interested in a bureaucratic argument as to whether your problem is a health one or a social care one. You want the support that you need. And the dilemma which my noble friend's report addresses is the dilemma that health is provided by national government and is free at the point of use. Social care is provided by local government and is means tested. And he addresses that problem in his report by suggesting that local government should provide social care, but it should be free and it should be funded by central government. That is the nub of the report. It's a hard-hitting report which expresses the frustration from noble lords at the delay in the social care green paper. I very much hope that his report will accelerate a solution to this long-standing problem.